there's a forgotten valley tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, so deeply carved by ancient rivers and time that the sun only touches it for a few hours each day. Here the air hangs heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying timber, and the silence is so profound it hums in your ears. Locals, a sparse and reclusive folk, speak of it as the hollow that holds its breath, a place where the mountains themselves listen. Hidden at the very heart of this secluded valley lie the crumbling remnants of Black Creek Mill, a massive timber processing operation that was the lifeblood of a thriving community in the early 20th century. In 1932, during the Great Depression, a catastrophic unseasonal flood surged through the valley, wiping out half the town and seemingly destroying the mill. The official report blamed geological instability and unprecedented rainfall, but the hushed, terrified accounts from the few surviving families spoke of a different, more unsettling truth. Not a natural disaster, but a profound, unnatural rhythm emanating from the mill's massive water wheel. A slow, deliberate beat that seemed to pull the waters higher, drawing the town into its watery embrace. Black Creek Mill became a ghost in the USA, hollow its existence eventually fading into local folklore and fragmented, desperate diaries of the displaced. This story begins with Dr. Silas Croft, a 55-year-old industrial archaeologist and acoustician from Pittsburgh. Silas wasn't interested in dusty relics or buried treasure. He pursued the echoes of forgotten industry, the sonic signatures of defunct machinery, and the hidden complexities of early 20th century engineering. Black Creek Mill to him was a fascinating historical enigma. He'd unearthed fragmented, heavily water-damaged blueprints of the mill, hinting at a custom-built, unprecedentedly large water wheel and a unique enclosed sluice system designed not just for power, but for generating a continuous low-frequency vibration. He'd also found chilling, unverified anecdotes from local folklore about the mill's founder, a reclusive and obsessive engineer named Elias Thorne, who reportedly believed in harmonic resonance as a form of perpetual energy. Silas believed Black Creek Mill's true horror lay not in its destruction, but in its impossible continued functionality. He never intended for his research to become an unwelcomed intrusion. He certainly never intended for the mill itself to feel his presence. But fragments of his journey, his descent into the living machinery, survived, captured on his specialized vibration analysis equipment, meticulously transcribed from his autonomous drone's audio logs, and ultimately retrieved from a waterlogged, encrypted external hard drive found weeks later, snagged in the deep roots of a sycamore tree miles from his mysteriously abandoned research vehicle. The first definitive sign that something was irrevocably wrong didn't come from a spectral presence or a sudden chill in the damp, heavy air. It came from the ground itself, a deep, insidious sensation that bypassed his scientific instruments and resonated directly within his very being. Silas had navigated the treacherous, overgrown logging trails and the dense, mist-shrouded valleys for days, guided by his advanced LiDAR mapping and the increasingly erratic readings from his ground-penetrating radar. He finally located the ruins of Black Creek Mill, a sprawling, dilapidated complex of waterlogged timber and rusted metal, swallowed by the encroaching wilderness. The air hung thick, cold, and strangely devoid of the usual sounds of a healthy forest. No rustling leaves, no chirping birds, no babbling creek. Just a profound, suffocating stillness. He spoke into his field recorder, his voice low, professionally detached, though a subtle undertone of profound curiosity, tinged with nascent unease, was already present. October 5th, 10:45 a.m. Location: Black Creek Mill, West Virginia. Ambient. Noise levels dropping precipitously within 50 meters of the main structure. Registers below typical environmental background. Approaches unnerving silence. This is anomalous. Extreme acoustic absorption. Consistent with accounts of the hollow that holds its breath. He paused, listening intently to the unsettling quiet that pressed in on his eardrums. It wasn't just quiet. It was an emptiness of sound, an unnerving vacuum that seemed to actively consume all vibration. He moved deeper into the complex, his reinforced boots crunching unnaturally loud on the damp, decaying timber, the sound immediately swallowed by the oppressive silence. He found the main entrance to the mill's processing hall, a massive rusted steel door seemingly jammed shut. But then a faint rhythmic thump, thump, thump resonated from deep within the structure, a colossal slow beat like a monstrous heart. It wasn't the sound of settling ruins or distant machinery. It was too regular, too powerful, too impossibly alive. Hours passed under the oppressive sunless sky, perpetually veiled by the dense fog. The silence grew heavier, more pervasive, now accompanied by a subtle, almost inaudible vibration that seemed to emanate directly from the mill's foundation, transferring through the ground into his very bones. He tried to dismiss it as residual seismic activity or distant geological shifts, but the sensation persisted, a dull ache that resonated deep within his skull, mirroring the rhythmic pulse. His biometric suit registered erratic neural activity, localized spikes in his auditory cortex, often associated with processing sound even though there was no external sound to process. His portable vibration analysis equipment, after hours of sweeping the vast silent ruins, finally locked onto a major undeniable anomaly. Not just residual vibration, but a consistent rhythmic harmonic frequency emanating from the buried section of the mill. This frequency was not mechanical. It was fluid, organic, like a vast pulsating organ. And from its very core, the thump thump. Thump intensified to a palpable throb, along with a faint luminous glow captured by the thermal imaging. Not heat, but light. A deep, impossible crimson, like a fresh bruise, but somehow terrifyingly intrinsically organic. He whispered into his recorder again, his academic detachment fractured by awe and profound dread. The source, it's deep, beneath the main water wheel's foundation, emitting a non-thermal luminous pulse, a deep organic crimson. The rhythmic beat, it's emanating directly from its core. The vibration, I feel it clearer now. It's like the mill is calling. The old folklore mentioned the heart of the hollow. This is it. This is the source. This is what truly drives Black Creek Mill. A metallic, coppery taste filled his mouth, a taste of burgeoning terror. Driven by a dangerous, irresistible combination of scientific imperative, fueled by the sheer impossibility of his discovery, and a burgeoning icy fear that chilled him to the core, Silas located the precise epicenter of the pulsing crimson anomaly. It was a section of the mill's collapsed foundation, where massive timbers and rusted gears lay half buried in the damp earth. The air here was utterly still, heavy with a profound earthy scent, now tinged with a faint coppery sweetness like old blood. The crimson light pulsed from within the very ground, a vast subterranean heart, its rhythm a slow, deliberate beat that seemed to synchronize with his own. He noticed peculiar, intricate patterns within the exposed bedrock itself, not just natural striations, but swirling inclusions that resembled trapped energy or perhaps frozen currents. He moved cautiously towards the source, his suit's lights cutting solitary beams through the oppressive gloom. The ground beneath him felt unnervingly soft, despite its solid appearance, almost like walking on vast, taut flesh. He could hear his own heartbeat unnaturally loud, echoing only within his own skull. But then other sounds began to intrude not from outside, but from within his own mind. Faint fragmented memories, half-formed thoughts, almost whispers of forgotten conversations, rising and falling with the crimson pulse. It was profoundly disconcerting, like his subconscious was being played back to him, distorted and amplified, woven with other alien impressions. He reached the center of the anomaly, where the crimson glow was brightest. Here, amidst the wreckage of the mill's gears, something impossible was located. It wasn't machinery. It was a vast organic mass, pulsating softly, half buried beneath the ground, its surface slick and vaguely membranous, radiating the crimson light. It was massive, stretching out of sight into the earth. It had the distinct rhythm of the thump-thump. Thump he had heard. This was the source of the mill's endless pulse. And then just beside the pulsating mass, something horrifying came into focus. Not a machine, but a humanoid figure partially submerged within the organic mass, as if caught mid-absorption. Its face, agonizingly clear despite the faint crimson glow, was contorted in a silent scream, its hands, outstretched fingers splayed. It was a man, likely one of the lost mill workers or townsfolk from the flood of 1932. His features were distinct, his expression raw terror. He was not merely a corpse. He was perfectly horrifyingly preserved, his essence suspended within the living tissue, a testament to an unspeakable fate. Silas stared horrified. This was beyond anything he had conceived. Not geological. Not even industrial, biological. He activated his bioscanner, pointing it at the organic mass. The readings were impossible. Not inert. Not dead. There was persistent bioelectrical activity. Faint, erratic, but undeniably present. The mass wasn't just preserving. It was sustaining. Against all logical judgment, compelled by a desperate need to understand, Silas reached out a gloved hand and gently placed it on the slick, warm surface of the organic mass encasing the man's arm. The moment his glove made contact, a searing jolt, not physical, but purely mental, shot through him. His vision blurred, filled with a blinding flash of crimson light, and then he was plunged into a torrent of raw, unfiltered sensation. Not words, but a rapid-fire sequence of images and emotions. The sudden crushing sound of rushing water, the agonizing creak of collapsing timber, the cold, slimy sensation of being enveloped, the horrifying realization that he was being preserved, aware as the world turned to living flesh around him. And then, a single agonizing, voiceless scream, echoing in an absolute, suffocating void. The vision lasted only a fraction of a second, but it felt like an eternity. Silas recoiled, tearing his hand away from the organic mass, gasping for breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. The internal thump, thump, thump in his head intensified, now accompanied by fainter, more ethereal clinks from within his own mind, like grinding gears. This was not a passive entity. This was a living processor, and it held conscious agony. The mental jolt from touching the organic mass reverberated through Silas, leaving him gasping, disoriented, his mind reeling from the torrent of borrowed terror. He stumbled backward, his suit's internal systems screaming warnings about neurological overload. The chilling images of the man's final moments, the rushing water, the crushing timber, the horrifying realization The voiceless scream were burned into his retinas, echoing in his thoughts. The profound silence of the valley seemed to press in harder, now no longer just a lack of sound, but a conscious, palpable presence. The subtle thump, thump, thump from the organic mass intensified, transforming into a deep, resonant bass note that vibrated through the very ground beneath his feet, through the soles of his boots, up into his bones. It felt like a colossal living drum beating out a vast, patient, predatory rhythm. He spoke into his recorder, his voice hoarse-strained. October 5th, 1:20 p.m. Direct contact made with organic anomaly. Experienced immediate intense psychological feedback. Shared subjective experience of entrapment. The entity, it captures consciousness. It preserves awareness. The mass is not inert. It's a living engine. My brainwave patterns are erratic. My mind, it feels stretched. He paused, listening to the new, deeper bass note. The clinking, it's still there. Faint, rhythmic, from within. He forced himself to calm, to analyze. The data streaming from his bio, scanner pointed at the organic mass, was impossible. High concentrations of complex biological polymers interwoven with unknown fluid structures, and persistent high-level bioelectrical signatures far beyond typical cellular decay rates. These were not dead organisms. They were suspended alive in some terrifying, agonizing state. The entity was a living, sentient biological machine capable of absorbing and retaining the essence of life in its final panicked moments. As he moved carefully through the wreckage of the mill, avoiding direct contact with the organic mass, the bass note deepened, becoming a vast resonant symphony that seemed to emanate from every surface. The air itself began to shimmer, subtly distorting his vision. He started seeing fleeting ethereal images projected directly into his mind's eye, not memories of the man he touched, but other fragmented experiences. A lumberjack frozen mid-swing, his terrified grunt echoing not in the air, but in his thoughts. A terrified family huddled in their home, their desperate prayers muffled by the encroaching water, felt through his own skin. The agonizing surrender of a massive ancient oak tree, its roots slowly being consumed by the rising water, its centuries of life compressed into a single overwhelming pulse of sorrow and surrender. The organic mass itself seemed to actively draw him in a seductive, irresistible pull emanating from its slick surfaces. It wasn't a physical suction, but a deep subconscious urge to touch, to merge, to understand the profound stillness, the agonizing peace it offered. His gaze kept returning to the horrifying beauty of the pulsating mass, its internal crimson glow, promising ultimate knowledge, eternal tranquility. He felt a profound sense of weariness, an aching desire to simply lean against one of the massive timbers, to let the hum wash over him, to become part of its vast living memory. His own will felt strangely weak, the boundaries of his self eroding under the constant mental assault. He activated his specialized thermal sensor, aiming at the surface of the organic mass. The readings were bizarre. The mass itself was radiating a subtle internal warmth far above ambient temperature, despite the cold, damp air. This warmth wasn't a byproduct of decomposition. It was consistent, regulated, almost like the internal temperature of a vast biological engine. This was a living organism, a colossal predatory entity slowly digesting the mill and its people. And then he saw it. Streaks of deeper, more vibrant crimson within the mass, forming intricate pulsing patterns that shifted and flowed like vast unseen neurological pathways. This mass was the entity's body, its flesh its mind. He realized with a horrifying clarity that the legends were wrong. The mill wasn't destroyed by the flood. The flood was its instrument, and everything within it. The terrifying realization solidified in Silas's mind. The organic mass was not merely a biological anomaly, but a vast predatory entity slowly consuming and assimilating Black Creek Mill and its people, transforming living matter into its own monstrous conscious form. The constant low bass note vibrated through the ground, growing more insistent, drawing him deeper into the mill's ruins. The mental echoes were no longer random fragments. They became more focused, more personal whispers, not of the victims, but seemingly directed at him. You seek function. We provide. Be absorbed. Be eternal. The words were formless, yet undeniably present in his thoughts, a seductive, invasive presence. He stumbled forward, driven by a desperate need to find evidence to prove this impossible horror. He saw it then, an active absorption site, a section of a large wooden gear, unnaturally still, its teeth at the very edge of the pulsating mass, already showing a faint crimson sheen. As he watched, horrified, a thin, almost invisible film of transparent crimson tissue seemed to spread across its surface, slowly, meticulously coating it, integrating it into the organic whole. It was happening in real time. The process was slow, agonizingly so, but inexorable. The dull timber slowly morphed, becoming part of the living, pulsating organism. Further ahead, closer to the largest section of the organic mass, he saw something even more disturbing. A large wild bear, half absorbed, its powerful hind legs still free, but its front paws, torso, and head already solidified into translucent crimson flesh. Its eyes, wide with unspeakable agony, reflected the terrifying beauty of the mass's glow. The bass note resonated from it, and Silas felt a surge of raw, animalistic terror, a desperate, futile struggle erupting in his mind as he inadvertently brushed his gloved hand against a low-hanging section of the mass. The bear was not dead. It was trapped alive in its silent flesh tomb, experiencing eternal agony. It's ongoing, he gasped into his recorder, his voice a raw whisper. The assimilation, it's not a past event. It's happening now. It's absorbing living organisms. And they're aware. They're conscious within the flesh. He could feel a faint, almost imperceptible warmth radiating from the very air around him. A subtle increase in the ambient temperature that his suit registered, consistent with a vast biological process consuming energy. The sweet coppery scent was stronger, almost suffocating. As he watched the horrifying transformation of the gear, a fine, almost invisible vapor began to rise from the surface of the organic mass, shimmering with faint crimson motes. It was not mist. It was a diffusion of the entity's essence, a fine, almost gaseous form of the living tissue itself. It swirled around his suit, clinging to the visor, making his vision subtly blurry. He felt an unsettling, tingling sensation on his exposed skin, around the cuffs of his gloves and the unprotected areas of his neck. It was a subtle stickiness, a faint tackiness, like fresh blood drying. He tried to wipe it away, but it seemed to cling stubbornly. Then, from the largest section of the organic mass, the ground itself seemed to undulate. A wave rippled outwards from its colossal bulk, not of earth, but of pulsating crimson flesh, smoothly extending, seeking. And then, from the surface of the mass, several translucent, flexible tendrils gleaming with internal crimson light slowly emerged. They were too perfectly formed to be natural roots or muscle. They were too purposeful in their movement. They moved slowly, sinuously, like probing fingers extending towards the still living trees, towards the absorbing gear, and terrifyingly towards him. The entity was not just consuming passively, it was reaching. The mental intrusions intensified, now accompanied by fragmented, distorted voices, not from the air, but from within his mind. Terrified, pleading whispers, joining the entity's pervasive bass note. Join the heart forever. He felt his own legs heavy, his movements sluggish, as if the very essence of the entity was beginning to seep into his joints, slowing his reactions. The terrifying realization solidified the entity wasn't just physical. It was a vast conscious machine of flesh, a trap laid for centuries, and he had stumbled into its very heart. The translucent crimson tendrils gleaming with internal light extended from the vast organic mass, inching across the damp ground towards Silas. Their movement was slow, deliberate, utterly silent, yet filled with an insidious, unyielding purpose. The mental intrusions roared in his mind, a chorus of fragmented pleas, and the entity's vast, unfeeling command: process, function, be assimilated. He could feel a subtle, unsettling warmth radiating from the tendrils, a warmth that promised not comfort but absorption. His own will felt fragile, battered by the constant psychic assault. He stumbled backward, desperately trying to evade the slow, methodical reach of the tendrils. His suit's internal systems screamed warnings about high-frequency energy absorption. The air around him was now thick with the fine, shimmering crimson vapor clinging to his suit, his skin, permeating his every breath. The sweet, coppery scent was overwhelming, almost intoxicating. He risked a glance down at his gloved hand. A faint, almost imperceptible crimson sheen was beginning to form on the surface of his glove, a subtle, glossy film that looked disturbingly similar to the initial stages of assimilation he had observed on the old timber. He frantically tried to rub it off, but it clung, subtly hardening. It was already spreading. The entity was not just reaching for him, it was actively consuming him molecule by molecule, his very skin, becoming the preliminary layer of its terrible, living flesh. "It's on me," he gasped into his recorder, his voice raw with a terror that transcended scientific curiosity. "The crimson vapor, it's infesting. I'm turning. It's starting to encapsulate me. I can feel it, a hardening on my skin." He tried to pull at the glove, but it felt strangely stiff, resistant. The massive organic mass from which the tendrils emanated began to pulse with a renewed, brighter crimson light. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump intensified, rising in pitch, becoming a low, grinding thrum like colossal gears, slowly turning, filling his head. The mental intrusions were no longer whispers, but loud, horrifying echoes of agonizing screams, thousands of trapped minds crying out in an unspeakable chorus of terror and eternal consciousness. This was the raw, unfiltered song of Black Creek Mill, composed of the final moments of all it had consumed, eternally cycling. Silas knew he couldn't fight it physically. The tendrils were slowly but surely gaining on him, their crimson tips almost touching his boots. The realization that he was facing a vast, sentient predatory consciousness, one that consumed life and processed agony, hammered into his mind with brutal clarity. He was just another component for its endless operation, another cog in its terrifying living machine. His eyes darted around the wreckage of the mill, desperate. His gaze fell upon his autonomous drone lying discarded near the edge of the complex, having crashed earlier due to the intense energy interference. Its outer shell was already partially coated in the thin crimson film of vapor, but its internal recording systems, designed to be hardened against extreme environments, might still be functional. If he could reach it, if he could transfer his final, horrifying data, his last observations, before he became completely assimilated. It was a desperate, illogical hope. He lunged towards the drone, forcing his stiffening limbs to move. The crimson tendrils, sensing his movement, accelerated their fleshy tips, striking the ground just inches behind his feet. The grinding hum of the mill intensified to a piercing whine, causing agonizing pain in his skull. The mental screams of the trapped souls became a deafening chorus, drowning out his own thoughts, pulling him towards the edge of madness. He reached the drone, his stiff fingers fumbling with the data port. The crimson film on his gloved hand was visibly thicker, now his movements becoming slow, deliberate, almost petrified. He slammed his suit's data cable into the drone's port, initiating an emergency upload. The drone's small indicator light flickered green, then blue, then with a final desperate surge glowing, a steady crimson mirroring the light that consumed the mill. Data was transferring, his knowledge, his warnings. But the tendrils were upon him. They wrapped around his legs, his arms subtle at first, then firm, pulling him gently, inexorably, towards the vast organic mass. He could feel the crimson film spreading rapidly across his entire suit over his faceplate, slowly obscuring his vision, turning the world into a single blinding crimson haze. The pervasive grinding hum became a part of him, vibrating through every cell. The mental screams of the trapped souls were no longer external. They were his screams merging with the chorus. His final thought as the crimson flesh fully encased his faceplate, his eyes wide and staring, his body frozen mid-struggle, was not of fear, but a horrifying, agonizing clarity. He was Black Creek Mill now, and he remembered everything. And he was processing. The autonomous drone, now fully encased in transparent crimson flesh, its internal lights, still faintly glowing crimson, transmitted its final data burst before its signal died forever. It contained Dr. Silas Cross's last log entries, fragmented biometric data, and horrifyingly, a final unidentifiable audio loop, a deep rhythmic thump, 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 punctuated by faint, constant clinking of unseen gears. And then a single agonizing, voiceless scream echoing in an absolute, suffocating organic void.